Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Bruce Agid. I'm the president of the San Francisco Eastern Neighborhoods Democratic Club. Tonight's event, first of all, I want to thank you for being here. I know everybody, there's so many priorities, and you all made this a #1 priority to be here tonight, and it is so much appreciated. For those of you who are not familiar with the San Francisco Eastern Neighborhoods Democratic Club, I'd like to just share with you what our mission and vision is. We provide a democratic political voice to advocate an urbanist equity platform with a focus on creating complete communities to keep current residents and families in San Francisco while welcoming newcomers. Our club primarily concentrates our organizing on the eastern neighborhoods or eastern part of the city in supervisory districts 3, 6, and 10. For those of you who are not familiar with what those boundaries are, it really starts at Fisherman's Wharf area and runs down the eastern part of the city down to Visitation Valley. ENDC will speak with a strong, unified voice focused on the issues related to the environment, public safety, affordable housing, transportation, education, open space, workforce opportunities, small business, and social justice. We will endorse candidates and propositions which support the platform and values of the club. And we organize at the intersection of community building and local politics. So with that, Amerika Sanchez, she's an educational leader and civic advocate based in San Francisco. As I mentioned before, she serves on our board of the Eastern Neighborhoods Democratic Club. She's our vice president of policy and advocacy. She's a principal at the Five Keys School and serves on the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. Her work spans education, civic engagement, and community-based partnerships with a focus on expanding access to opportunity for adult learners and underserved communities. With prior experience as a U.S. history and American government teacher, she brings a strong foundation in the historical, civic, and constitutional context shaping tonight's conversations. And Amerika will be moderating tonight's discussion. With that, Amerika, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So good evening, everyone. My name is Amerika Sanchez, as Bruce mentioned. I realize that my name is especially on theme tonight, so I'll do my best to guide the conversation well. So I want to start first by introducing our two guests today. I will start with David Chiu. So David Chiu is the 15th City Attorney of San Francisco and the first Asian American in that role. As one of the country's top municipal law offices, the City Attorney's Office provides legal counsel to the mayor, the Board of Supervisors, and 100+ departments, boards, and commissions that comprise San Francisco's $16 billion government. Under David's leadership, his office has brought 14 lawsuits against the second Trump administration in 2025, standing up for—
15 now, but who's counting?
Oh. Good on you, yes. Standing up for immigrants, education, the environment, healthcare, housing, infrastructure, and public safety. Previously, David served 7 years as an assembly member representing San Francisco in the California State Legislature and 6 years as president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, as the first Asian American in both roles and author to close to 200 state and local laws. A former chair of the California Asian Pacific Islander Legislation Caucus, he helped deliver the largest state budget investment in the country to combat anti-Asian hate, $166 million, and champion groundbreaking civil rights, immigrant rights, and housing laws. In the legislature, he also served as the Assistant Speaker pro tempore, Chair of the Assembly Housing and Community Development Committee, and Policy Chair of the California Legislative Progressive Caucus. Before holding elective office, David served as a law clerk to a Ninth Circuit federal appellate judge, a criminal prosecutor, a civil rights attorney, Democratic counsel to the U.S. Senate Constitution Subcommittee, and co-founder of the Public Affairs Technology Company. Of a public affairs technology company. The son of immigrants, he received his undergraduate master's in public policy, and law degrees from Harvard. So welcome, David. And then I would like to also introduce Bill Hing. He's a professor of law and migration studies at the University of San Francisco and professor of law and Asian American studies, Emirates at UC Davis. Sorry. He founded the Immigrant Legal Resource Center in San Francisco in 1979 and helps direct the USF Immigration and Deportation Defense Clinic. Professor Hing teaches immigration law and policy, migration studies, rebellious lawyering, I want to learn about that, and immigration policy clinic. He has been an immigration lawyer since 1974, and throughout his career, Professor Hing has pursued social justice by combining community work, litigation, and scholarship. His books include American Presidents, Deportations and Human Rights Violations, written in 2019, Immigration Law and Social Justice, 2018, Ethical Borders, NAFTA, Globalization and Mexican Migration, 2010, Deporting Our Souls, Values, Morality, and Immigration Policy, 2006, and Defining America Through Immigration Policy, 2004. He was co-counsel in the U.S. Supreme Court Asylum Precedent-Setting Case, INS versus Cardoza-Fonseca in 1987, and also represented the State Bar of California before the California Supreme Court in Reggio Garcia in 2014, involving bar membership for undocumented law graduates. So welcome. Thank you both for being here. So to start tonight's program, give me a minute, I have my notes. Or I should say my lesson plan, right, as a teacher. So to start tonight's program, I have here just a flow of what we will be covering. So obviously we covered our welcome, and then we're moving into, there's 3 different parts of conversation. So the first one is history and legal precedent. So we'll show a video during this part and have a brief conversation. We'll give a little bit of history. We won't spend too much time in history because we want to get to the current stuff, right? So part 2 will then move us into current litigation. Part 3 will then, answer the question of what comes next and why this matters to everyone. We will then set aside time for audience Q&A. So those of you who have note cards, that's an opportunity for you to write your questions. And then we'll have members of our board go around and collect those questions, and then we'll try to get through as many as we can tonight. And then we'll close, and that's pretty much the end of the program. So it'll move fast. Thank you so much for being here again, and we will go ahead and get started. The first thing that we'll move into is, and again, this is part 1, we have a video that we would like to share with you, and it's about 11 minutes long. And we just thought it was like a fast way to get through some historical context so that we can just be on the same page about all the things that are getting referenced in the current issues that are taking place right now. So we will start with the video, and then we will discuss. This is bringing us to the present, right? So this is where the conversation is starting, but you have the historical context. I just want to say how exciting it is that San Francisco has the historical relevance of the case that kind of reopened the conversation about the 14th Amendment, the Wong Kim Ark case that was mentioned there, but then also the legislation that David Chiu's office is bringing forth against the second Trump administration. So we'll actually transition into our conversation now. There's only a few minutes left, but I just want to be mindful of our time so we can get to conversation. If you can join me. Yes. You don't want to join me up here? So thank you for watching that, and again, we wanted to just give you that historical context of how it all came about and why it's still a point of debate. And so, as you saw in the video, birthright citizenship in the U.S. has deep legal roots in the 14th Amendment and landmark court cases. And so to set the stage for our discussion, let's kind of talk about that legal history and the relevance today. So my first question to you all is, and I'll start with you, Bill. So even after the courts issued rulings, questions about who qualifies as a citizen continue to arise. So from a legal and historical perspective, why do those questions remain unsettled despite these long-standing precedents?
Can you hear me? The legal questions over birthright citizenship remain because of racism. It's pretty clear that from the beginning, even when the 14th Amendment went through its vote in the U.S. Senate, I guess it was 33 to 11 or something like that, there were 11 people that didn't agree. And so, and as the video shows that there's 40% of Americans. So that's why the issue keeps coming up, that there are people that do not believe that the children of undocumented immigrants who are born here deserve U.S. citizenship. And the truth is, and I'm going to overstate something, there are undocumented, I've been doing this work, as was noted, for more than 50 years. There are undocumented immigrants in the United States from all over the world, okay, including Europe. But for the first couple decades that I was doing this work, it became very evident that there was an anti-Mexican sentiment in the United States, and to a degree, anti-Asian sentiment still continued. I first worked in Chinatown. And today, when you fast forward to the current time, the border, the images of the border are used and were used very, very successfully by our current president to help him gain the White House twice. It's anti-immigrant sentiments that is targeting those that get so much, that are put on the front pages. And there are substantial numbers of Americans who do not like that, who do not like the images of those folks at the border. And it's a little bit more than anti-Mexican. I think it's now anti-Central American. There's a lot of anti-Black migration sentiment in the United States as well. And I'm not sure how else to put it. That's why the issue keeps coming up over and over again, because many people in this country do not like the fact that the children of immigrants of color are getting birthright citizenship.
Thank you, Bill. And David, how do you see those uncertainties that keep popping up? How are you seeing them playing out in current litigation?
So the quick answer is we are living Groundhog Day. Literally, the arguments that are being raised today and the defenses to those arguments are the same debate that we've had for over a century, and here we are. I want to just make one sort of observation about ENDC hosting this event, which was hopefully apparent from the history, which is the tie between the Dred Scott case and the Wong Kim Ark case, or, if I may say, the ties between our African-American community struggles and our Asian-American community struggles. So ENDC, when Bruce approached me now almost 8 years ago, said, hey, I want to knit the neighborhoods of the eastern side of San Francisco together. You know, part of the mission of this organization was to think about how to bring together communities of diversity that often did not work together. We have, I see Toye Moses, who's has been the chair of the African American Democratic Club, others of you who have headed up API Democratic organizations. This issue started with one of the very worst Supreme Court decisions in the history of our country, the Dred Scott decision, right, which said if you are black, you are not considered a citizen, a human being. And we fixed that with the 14th Amendment, and when Congress fixed it, they did it in a way that allegedly was going to take care of everybody. But then a couple decades later, the question came up of, well, did it really include everybody? Maybe not. And then we have Wong Kim Ark. One other thing I'll just say about the history of Wong Kim Ark. So this is a person who was born here in San Francisco, born on Sacramento Street, just a couple blocks from here. And he was born during a time of intense anti-Asian sentiment. And what was remarkable about his story, so his parents, he was born to his parents here. His parents experienced so much discrimination that they decided to go back to China. And he decided at one point to go visit them. And when he came back, that was when he was held on a steamboat for 5 months, awaiting a federal government that was pointing to him as, this is our test case to finally kick the Asians out. And what was remarkable about that, I'll just add one more point of history that wasn't in there, was it was actually Chinese immigrant families that pooled together the legal resources to hire the best legal help that he could get, who, by the way, was white at the time. And these lawyers litigated the case all the way up to the Supreme Court. For those of you who know anything about how the Chinese community is organized, we have these things called family associations. And the Chinese family associations literally put money into a hat, got money for this poor guy who was a cook, for his case to go all the way up to the Supreme Court at a time when the federal government was not that different from our current federal government. Anti-immigrant, anti-Asian, anti-this. And yet the Supreme Court ruled the right way in that case and said the 14th Amendment, we're just going to read the plain language. It says, if you are born, you are subject to the jurisdiction, you are a citizen. And what's amazing is 128 years later, in 2 weeks, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to consider this very case yet again, involving the same set of legal arguments that were made 100 plus years ago.
Same issue, yeah. Thank you for that. And I just want to then move on. I want to show you something, and this is also just context for the audience as well. It's just a very brief timeline, because I want to talk about the current litigation, and I want to talk about the class action case. So you mentioned in 2 weeks, there's the oral arguments being scheduled with the Supreme Court. And so this is just a timeline of how we even got to that, because I want to ask a question about what the work you're doing. So you could just see here, it started, so this whole conversation, even our board, when we saw that the executive order was signed, in January of 2025, we're like, wow, this is going to be big. What is this going to even do? And then you could just see that immediately after, lawsuits were filed nationwide, including California, fighting against this executive order, contesting this executive order. And then mid to late 2025, there was, some conflicting lower court rulings and injunctions that were put in place. And then early 2026, the Supreme Court agrees to hear the consolidated cases, which we'll talk about. And then spring 2026, April 1st, is when the oral arguments are going to be scheduled. So I just wanted you to see the timeline and how there was like a rapid response to it. And so now I want to get into some of the questions around this current litigation, and I would like to hear from both of you. So New Jersey and several other states and local governments, including San Francisco, brought forth a class action case challenging this executive order that was titled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. So David, how did this group of states and cities come together to challenge this executive order?
Before you say anything, David, I want to give our city attorney just full credit, because his office and he did not wait. They immediately went into full speed to challenge this, and he joined forces with others who were also racing to that line. But as far as I know, he's the first city attorney in the United States that stepped forward to file these lawsuits, and so I want to pay credit where credit's due.
Thank you for your service.
Of course, thank you. Well, I have to start by saying I called this guy a couple weeks before we did it and said, are we crazy to do this? And Bill was like, go. So we were the first city. San Francisco was the first city to sue the Trump administration within 24 hours after he had been inaugurated. But let me take it back and explain how we got to that point. So Trump had been saying for a number of years that if he was reelected, he was going to ban birthright citizenship as part of Project 2025. And we all heard it, and really the question in many of our heads was, is he actually going to do something that so violently flies in the face of what the U.S. Constitution says? But that being said, we took him at face value. I had asked my team in 2024, in the months leading up to his inauguration, start researching, start figuring this out. And he kept saying it, I'm going to ban birthright citizenship. So we took him at his word, and we assumed he was going to do it. We started preparing the paperwork. I'll share a little fun thing. So some of you may remember there were a number of us who were reelected in 2024, and I had a swearing-in ceremony a few days into the new year. This is a couple weeks before Trump is inaugurated, and a friend of mine from the legislature, Rob Bonta, our AG, came and swore me in. And for those of you who were there, you may remember I actually said that birthright citizenship could be challenged, and if that happens, we will be there. It was vague because we didn't know what was going to happen, but it was actually that moment I was sitting next to Bonta, and we were talking about this, and I said to him, you know, this case, you know how important this case is, not just to our country, but to San Francisco, given the history. We were pivotal. Our community was pivotal in actually creating the Supreme Court precedent that established birthright citizenship. And he said, you know, his folks were thinking about it too, so we got our teams together. Around the same time, there was another attorney general who was the first Asian American AG from the state of Connecticut, and he was quoted in the New York Times saying, if they come after birthright citizenship, we're gonna be there. So Rob and I give William Tong a call, and his AG colleagues all started chatting. And we decided to all fold in together. A lawsuit brought by 18 states, the District of Columbia, and the City and County of San Francisco. And our contribution to the effort was really the historical study, the experience that we had, and where that went back. If you go to Stockton Street in Chinatown, and you go to the Chinese Six Companies headquarters, that's like the birthplace. That's the history of where that money was raised. It is embedded in our DNA. And so we decided we were going to sue. Now, at the same time, there were a number of other lawsuits that were filed within those first few weeks. And maybe to fast forward a little bit, in every single case under the United States Supreme Court, every court that has considered the substantive issue of whether the 14th Amendment allows birthright citizens to be citizens, they have found in our favor of the plain language of the Constitution, in favor of the legislative history that you just heard, in favor of English jurisprudence and anti-Civil War jurisprudence, and yet we are still having this debate. But, you know, long story short, it was a number of us realizing how fundamental this would be. And then maybe I'll just add one more thing, which is I am a birthright citizen. My parents immigrated here. I was the first member of my family born here. My guess is there are many of us in this room and many, many San Franciscans who are either non-citizen immigrants or birthright citizens. And so this is very, very personal for many of us.
Thank you for that. And so I want to then ask you, Bill, from your perspective, so hearing all of this and then just thinking about the timeline, what does this multi-jurisdictional coalition signal about the broader legal and constitutional stakes of this issue?
Well, it goes to show you just how concerned the country is about this issue, because it doesn't take much to determine that throughout the United States, we living here in the West Coast, we have an image, we have a reality of living in communities that are very diverse, immigration-wise. Well, the same is happening actually in the South. It's happened in the Midwest and in different parts of the country. And there are right-minded leaders in many of those states that are affected who understand how this proposal will affect their communities. And it's more than just the fact of citizenship. It's the fact of belonging. You know, because if you don't have citizenship, if you don't have, if you will, a leg to stand on, then you're not a full-fledged citizen of the United States. And so this is very much a sense of being part of the United States, being part of the polity, being part of the ability to participate in every aspect of life in the United States. And so it's personal for me too. A member of the audience asked me something that she thought I would want to keep secret, but I've actually written about it. and it's whether or not my parents were lawful here, whether or not they had false immigration papers, and they did. And so it's not uncommon, especially for somebody my age, to have had parents who use false documents to come into the United States. Paper son. I'm the son. My father was a paper son. He purchased the ability to claim birth to somebody who was actually allegedly born in the United States, and through that he derived U.S. So the truth is, it's very personal for me, because I would fall squarely into the executive order, because my parents are undocumented, and both of them, and I would not be eligible to be a U.S. citizen, even though I was born in the middle of Arizona.
And I'm sorry, I can't help but think about when you said the privileges of being a citizen, right, and voting, and how right now there's high-stakes voting that's about to come, midterm elections, and then this is timely as well. I don't know. I just think that it's an attack on people being able to engage in civil opportunities, and it's beyond just you don't belong here. It's like we're actually taking away your ability.
Well, you know, Amerika, that's such a great question, because we're talking about an immigration issue right now, but we also know that the White House has attacked DEI. We know that they're threatening the midterms, and City Attorney Chiu probably knows a lot about what the city's going to have to do to protect against that. This is very much about disenfranchisement. I know some of you are going to roll your eyeballs because I'm going to repeat myself. This is very much disenfranchisement of people of color in the United States in many different ways. And it's not just immigration. It's all these different attacks that our communities have been subject to over the last year.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I just also want to ask a few questions to emphasize the scope of the work, because it's not just about this class action case, even though it's important because it's going to the Supreme Court, but there's also a parallel case being litigated in the First Circuit Court. So from a procedural and strategic standpoint, how does this class action case differ from that case? Like, why are there two?
All right, so first of all, there are multiple birthright citizenship cases. There's the case that we brought with states in our jurisdiction. There are cases brought by organizations, cases brought on behalf of individuals, cases brought by other collections of local and state jurisdictions. But this is not the first time this issue has been in front of this Supreme Court. So all these cases get filed in the early part of last year, so in the first few months after Trump comes in office. And all the decisions are in our favor. But what the Trump administration decided to do was they took one of these cases up on appeal, up to the Supreme Court on a procedural issue. And here's the procedural issue, is whether the decisions that all the rest of us had gotten, which are known as preliminary injunctions, an order by the court, whether those ought to apply nationally. So let me explain that. So oftentimes when you sue, say, the government, and the government does something wrong, and a judge says to government, you screwed up, and I'm going to issue an order, that order typically applies, or it used to apply, nationally. So in the past, it was the case that if a judge says birthright citizenship is legal, that would prevent the Trump administration from having a ban that would apply nationally. It's called national injunction. The conservative world has been upset about the fact that we could go to the courts and in one case get an order that would apply to everyone around the country. And so they challenged whether our injunctions should have national impact. It was a procedural move, and what the court said when they first took this up in the middle of last year was they sided with the Trump administration. They said, you know, we're not going to rule on the substance, the merits, the actual decision about whether those judges got it right or wrong, but we're not going to allow those orders to apply nationally. Now, let me tell you what the implication of that is. So you had a bunch of cases in a bunch of jurisdictions that said birthright citizenship is constitutional. But there are many parts of the country, many states, many appellate jurisdictions where there was not a case that was litigated. And so we literally found ourselves after that decision with a situation where we had courts in some parts of the country saying birthright citizenship is legal, and in other parts of the country, they hadn't ruled, so it's unclear as to what's going to happen. So it was in that context, right after the so-called CASA decision came down in June of 2024, last year, that a group of advocacy organizations filed another case to challenge birthright citizenship because the Supreme Court in its decision said, we're going to clip the wings of so-called national injunctions, but we're going to allow potentially class actions or individuals or organizations who call themselves a class. It's an esoteric legal term, but essentially, I think many of you know what an average class action is. We're going to allow you to use this procedure to get a whole bunch of people together to potentially result in a decision that would apply to the entire country. And so that was how the class action lawsuit within the birthright citizenship case began. And because of how that was structured, that case moved fairly quickly through the legal process. And again, all the judges that looked at this said, yes, we're going to allow a class certification of all babies who were born after February 2024 who would be impacted by this to be considered a class and have their rights adjudicated by the courts. And all the courts that have looked at this have said, yes, these babies are a class. Yes, they should be birthright citizens. That's the case that is now up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, not our cases. But of course, all these cases are related. The actual substantive issue is the same. Does the 14th Amendment protect the citizenship rights of individuals born in the United States? So
let me add one other thing about why it's important that these multiple lawsuits were filed. Because again, we live in a bubble, especially here in Northern California. There are states that are chomping at the bits to apply the executive order, most notably Texas. Texas is already keeping track of children that are born to parents whom the state of Texas believes are undocumented. They've got a list already of people, and if they get the right decision from the Supreme Court, they're going to de-citizenship those children that have already been born in the last year.
And I'll mention one other thing, just thinking about the chaos of the legal situation now. So the judges have essentially, or the Supreme Court essentially said, we're not going to immediately touch whether birthright citizenship is constitutional or not in these parts of the country that have already ruled it. In these other parts, it doesn't apply. And so literally, depending on where you live in the country, you may or may not be a citizen. Like, we're just in this bizarre limbo land right now because of the Supreme Court ruling.
Wow. Thank you for that. And that was actually the question I was going to ask you, Bill. I was going to ask you your perspective on how this issue is being tested across the judiciary. So thank you for providing that context. Another thing that we actually had a glimpse at as a club, we got to review an amicus brief on Trump versus Barbara. So maybe you can explain what that is, but also why your office chose to file this brief in addition to all the litigation. Like, why did you feel the need to do that?
Because we don't have enough work to do.
Right.
So an amicus brief is fancy. It's a Latin term for a friend of the court. And it's essentially the ability, when the Supreme Court is considering an issue and you have a dispute between two parties, other folks that have a stake in the outcome can file a written document that lays out arguments that we hope the Supreme Court considers as they're considering the case. So obviously, because all of these issues are intertwined, and this is likely the decision by the Supreme Court on the substantive question of birthright citizenship, we wanted to make sure that our perspective was considered. And so the parties to our lawsuit, which were the 18 states and the District of Columbia and San Francisco, we filed a separate amicus brief in this space. I will tell you at this point, we have filed, I think, 35 amicus briefs across a whole bunch of cases, but we wanted to make sure that all of the arguments that we would raise are being considered, and that is what's encompassed in the brief.
So it's just additional context.
It's additional context, just making sure, putting all the arguments in front of the Supreme Court to make sure that if the arguments and questions that they hear from the parties in chief that are arguing this case, if they're feeling a little uncomfortable about those arguments, we want to provide the full panoply of options for the court. And so we go through everything from the plain language of the 14th Amendment to the jurisprudence that we've talked about, from English law centuries ago to post-Civil War jurisprudence to the to acts of Congress that put into federal law what was embodied in the 14th Amendment in the 1940s and 1950s, to how courts have interpreted this over the years. So we did our own sort of deep dive into this, and we've dished this up to the court and said, you can read those papers, you can read these papers, but please, for the love of God, uphold birthright citizenship.
Thank you. And Bill, how do amicus briefs more broadly shape the court's understanding of issues like that? So in your experience.
So these amicus briefs, or the friend of courts briefs, are vital. Sometimes they're important because the main litigators are not competent. That's not true in this case, okay? But there's actually a page limitation that each party can write in terms of number of pages. So what happens is that you pretty much know what the bad guys are arguing, and you know all the different issues that need to be addressed, and the main litigator can't address all of them fully, and so they turn to amicus, they turn to friends to say, you concentrate primarily on this because that will be helpful to us. Other people concentrate on this part, so that the court can have a full understanding of all these vital importance. Alluding to British history, common law, it turns out it's very important because in the case, and I know we might get to this, America, but the government is arguing that the understanding of whether or not somebody is subject to the jurisdiction has to do with the issue of whether or not somebody can establish domicile in the United States. But it's very important to understand that we modeled the language of the 14th Amendment based on what's called British common law, okay, English common law, and that's old stuff. But we needed, the litigators needed a full understanding of this historical British common law, English common law, in order for the Supreme Court to understand, oh, okay, this is what's happening, and if the government is arguing this issue, well, they're wrong because somebody has presented this full historical basis. The other thing is the Supreme Court has a lot of resources, okay? The Supreme Court has a lot of law clerks that are graduates of top law schools, and they're all reading. Don't feel sorry for the 9 justices, even though some of them, a couple of them are old geezers. They've got young, energetic law clerks that are reading all this stuff and putting it into context for the justices.
Yeah. And I heard there's hundreds, like on both sides, amicus briefs that are being sent, and they're all from different types of experts, like historians and nonprofits and just different organizations trying to provide their perspective, arguing on either side of it. Thank you for that. So just to be mindful of time, I would like to move into part 3, which is what comes next and why this matters to everyone. And then I just want to do a check of the room and just say, if you have questions, as questions are coming up, please feel free to fill out a question card. We have people of our club that are able to collect those, and then we'll sort through and get through as many as we can. So just a reminder, raise your hand, and then someone will come and provide a card, an index card. So we have some people, yeah, so we have someone in the front here. Index card, and she wants one. Okay, so let's talk about so we have a very, very, very short clip. This is not as long as the one before. And it's just to give the context of the concerns of what's at stake with this Supreme Court case. So we will transition to that, and then a few more questions, and then questions from the audience. So do you agree with her assessment? I mean, she seemed to have this belief that, oh, it's just more like a procedural thing. Of course they're not going to vote. It should be 8-1, 7-2. Like, what are your thoughts about that? Because that was like a person brought in as a legal expert, right, on the news.
Yeah, Professor Levinson is very optimistic. I share her optimism, but not an 8-1 optimism. I think our side will win, but I think at best it'll be 6-3, and I can name the three that will probably say no, beginning with Alito and Thomas, and probably Kavanaugh or Gorsuch, okay? And so it could end up being 5-4. I think that Amy Coney Bryant and the Chief Justice will vote the right way. Here's why I'm worried. That, as I said earlier, the government is arguing that the term subject to the jurisdiction is equal to if you have lawful domicile in the United States, if your parents have lawful domicile in the country, even though the 14th Amendment doesn't say any of that, okay? But they're arguing that that's the way it should be interpreted, and they're arguing policy, they're making policy arguments. They're saying, oh, if we don't allow the executive order, it allows these children to jump ahead of the line of people that are trying to immigrate. It promotes birth tourism, where people have come here to give birth, and some people call it a loophole. I call it the law. Okay, if your kids are born here, they're citizens, but there is this birth tourism that's going on, and that birthright citizenship degrades the meaning and the value of American citizenship. None of that is relevant to whether or not somebody is subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. None of it's relevant. But those policy arguments are what fuels the earlier question of why are there so many people that are opposed to birthright citizenship? These are the reasons people don't like it. And I'm worried that some of the justices will buy into those policy arguments and make up a reason to tie it to some requirement that's not on the face of the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. David, what do you think?
So I agree with Bill on this. I was going to say that I'm cautiously optimistic, but I don't think I'm going to actually use that phrase. If the Supreme Court strikes down birthright citizenship, we are in unbelievable trouble as a country, because the plain language, the jurisprudence, the case, this is one of those overwhelming cases, right? Like for many of us, trying to see it from the other side, there just aren't very many arguments. And so I do agree with Bill that I hope a majority of this court will come down the right way, but we have seen in the last year plus, this court time after time after time side with this administration. So I'd like to hope what's going to happen. Jessica Levinson is a very well-regarded commentator, but we all should be praying to whatever God you believe in, on what happens in a couple weeks and what happens in a couple months on this. Because again, if things go badly, it foretells some really dark times.
Thank you. And I just based off of what we might have been all seeing in the news recently, I'd feel like I would be remiss if I didn't ask about Homeland Security and ICE and those kind of things. And I wanted to take a moment to highlight another one of your cases, San Francisco versus Trump, and part of the sanctuary city litigation in which you recently secured a preliminary injunction. Can you explain what that preliminary injunction does? And then I want to hear from Bill as well.
Sure. So the first case we filed was birthright citizenship. The second case we filed was to defend our city's so-called sanctuary policies. And let me just take a moment and explain what that is. The Trump administration likes to refer to sanctuary policies, suggesting that somehow we're harboring criminals. That is an absolute bald-faced lie. That is not what sanctuary policies are about. All sanctuary policies say is that our resources, our scarce resources, should not be deputized or commandeered by the federal government to move forward their policy agenda. In this case, we're saying our police officers shouldn't be deputized as ICE agents. That's it. We're not saying that we are harboring anybody. We are not saying that we are actively preventing the enforcement of federal immigration law. We're simply saying that our police officers ought to be able to do their jobs, not the job of the federal government. And why is that important? Because if our communities don't trust police officers and think they are ICE agents, when crimes are committed, they will not trust police officers to report crimes. as victims or witnesses to crimes. And the studies show that sanctuary jurisdictions are as safe, if not safer, than non-sanctuary jurisdictions. So that's what this discussion is about, but let me talk to you about the legality. So 8 years ago, when Trump was first in office, he tried to go after sanctuary jurisdictions like San Francisco. My predecessor, Dennis Herrera, filed a lawsuit to challenge that. We were victorious at that time at the district court level and at the Ninth Circuit level, never went up to the Supreme Court. That case is still good in the Ninth Circuit, the Western states. And so Trump, in his first couple weeks, he doubled down on sanctuary cities. He said, we're going to not only go after sanctuary cities, we're going to strip all of your federal funding, which to our city is $3.7 billion. And so I had to file our second lawsuit to challenge this. Among a lot of arguments we raised, we said, hey, we already litigated this issue a couple years ago. We won, so why are we here again? The district court held in our favor. This case is up in front of the Ninth Circuit yet again. Although I will say, the Ninth Circuit at this moment, after the first Trump administration, is much more conservative than it was 7, 8 years ago. Many more Trump judges, so we will see kind of how this goes. But long-winded way to say, sanctuary policy is incredibly important to our city. Because if we don't have sanctuary policy, we are in this choice of, do we allow our cops to be deputized by ICE agents, or do we give up all this federal funding? And it would put us in an untenable situation. I want to just take a moment and point out we have the head of our Office of Immigration Affairs, Jorge. You want to raise your hand, Jorge? Thank you for being here. You know, as a city, we put ourselves out as saying we are a haven. We want to welcome immigrants. We want to serve immigrants. We don't create distinctions in a lot of the services that we provide based on citizenship. This case, the Birthright citizenship case, the sanctuary city case, would overturn all of the values that we care about and force us as a city to change a lot of policies that we have. So these are really very fundamentally important issues.
Thank you. And Bill, do you see any connection between the litigation with regard to the sanctuary cities and the conversation about birthright citizenship? Mm-hmm. What is the correlation you see?
Yeah, it all has to do with regulation of immigrants, okay? And let me piggyback on what the city attorney said. Brilliant lawsuit. The basis of a sanctuary ordinance is public safety. So I'm repeating what the city attorney said. We have a sanctuary policy because we want every segment of the community to trust the police. If they don't trust the police, they won't report crimes that they've witnessed. They won't report crimes that they're victims of. And that's not good for anyone in the city if no one trusts the police. So it's public safety. It's not to provide safe harbor to immigrants. It's for public safety. The reason why I'm saying that is, and it's a quick constitutional law point. Only the federal government has the ability to regulate immigration. So if you pass a law that says we're doing this to help immigration, you can't do that. You can't regulate immigration. That's why an anti-immigrant law, like Arizona did more than a dozen years ago, passed a series of laws that made life miserable for non-citizens in Arizona. They said, the governor signed that bill, SB 1070, and said, we're doing this because ICE is not doing its job. So she admitted that they were passing their anti-immigrant law to help regulate immigration. And the Supreme Court struck that down because the state cannot regulate immigration. That's why when we pass an ordinance, our reason for doing it is not to provide safe harbor to immigrants. It's for public safety. You have to give a non-immigration related answer to that question.
Thank you. So just for for the sake of time, I do want to get to some of the questions in the audience. I know there were some important things raised in the conversation, and I imagine that there are folks that are probably concerned, like worried about the what if. Before I get into the questions, do you have any thoughts or suggestions on if there are concerns, if people are concerned about their situation, or like what are some avenues that people can pursue right now if they're concerned about birthright citizenship?
Well, let me try my answer first, David. First of all, San Francisco is a great community to work in when it comes to the immigrant rights community. And the city and county deserves credit, because the city and county actually provides funding for at least 3 different types of entities: a rapid response network, SF Island, which deals with a range of other services, and the San Francisco Immigrant Legal Defense Collaborative, which the immigration clinic at USF is part of. It's millions of dollars that the city provides, and agencies are available to answer questions. There's a lot of cooperation among all those agencies. I'm on signal groups, I'm on emails every day where information is shared, and our agencies do our best to provide free consultations to residents of San Francisco if they have immigration questions.
And Bill, you take emergency cases?
Absolutely. We are part of the rapid response. We're on call. The USF clinic, like other programs in the city, we're on call in San Francisco every 7 weeks. We're on call in Sonoma County, this is a different contract, every 2 or 3 weeks. And in Sonoma County, I'm in call every 4 weeks in Sonoma County to handle emergency calls.
Thank you for that.
I'll just say, and the fact that all of you are here means you care about this issue. You care about the state of our country, our democracy right now. There is not a darker moment when it comes to our democracy than where we are at this moment. And I do think it's incumbent on anyone who cares about this to act. It's one thing, obviously, to come to forums like this to be educated, but if you're ever going to get involved in anything, this is the time. So whether it be volunteering to work with nonprofit organizations that are assisting immigrant families who are struggling right now, helping to raise money for those organizations, helping to organize for the 2026 elections. If we're in a law school, if you have a legal background, there is no shortage of work for individuals and organizations that are in dire need of help right now. And this is the crisis, but this is the opportunity for us to use whatever talents, skills, knowledge you have in some way. But I just think if there's ever time for us to take action, we have to take action at this moment. I think a lot about whether we are in 1933 Germany or 1939 Germany. I'm not sure, but we're somewhere in that decade. And at that time, it's just incumbent on all of us to act in concert, because if we don't, it may be too late.
Thank you. So I will transition now. I know there's so many more questions we can ask you. I mean, we could be here all night asking questions, but I do want to also give the audience an opportunity so you can hear from some of the folks that had questions in the audience. So one question is, how common is birthright citizenship among nations in the world? Like this issue, is it something that is common in other places? To what degree?
Yeah, do you have an answer?
It's quite common. The stats are somewhere in here. I forgot the exact numbers, but it's quite common.
Yeah, it's quite. I used to know the number of countries. It's not true all over the world, but is it true in many countries of the world as well? And so we're not an outlier. The United States is not unusual in that sense.
And then a follow-up to that is, for nations that don't practice birthright citizenship, in your opinion, or in your research, is that policy rooted in racism or simply their right to define their own citizenship? Do you pick up any element of racism with theirs?
Japan is notable because Japan doesn't recognize birthright citizenship. I have relatives who were born in Japan, but they were Chinese and they never obtained Japanese citizenship. And so it has a lot to do with their sense of who they are. And I think that they've never gotten over it, to be honest with you. And so that's why am I saying this? You can quote me. I'm actually proud of the United States. I'm I'm proud of birthright citizenship because the United States is not a perfect country, but there are so many things to like about it, including our ability to stand up here and be able to criticize the president, that I just, it's a special place, and birthright citizenship is partly what makes it special.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question, very interesting. It's kind of tying to maybe states' rights and those kind of things. So could states, depending on how this goes, right, with the Supreme Court, could states end up deciding citizenship? Could citizenship be a state-by-state situation? That's interesting.
Well, no, I mean, because of what I said earlier, only the federal government has the right to regulate immigration. Being the academic that I am, I will tell you that I am worried about Texas. Because Texas has something called Operation Lone Star, and you can Google that. Has a lot of different elements to it. And, for example, under Texas law, a state court judge can order somebody deported. Let me repeat that. Under Texas, they pass a law that a state court judge can deport somebody. Now, of course, that's unconstitutional, but that's going to work its way up to the court. And that and several other provisions of Operation Lone Star, and I worry that the Supreme Court might let certain state laws that affect immigrants go forward, even though they decided more than 12 years ago in the Arizona case that they couldn't do it. But citizenship, no way would they allow a state to determine U.S. citizenship.
Thank you. If the courts end birthright citizenship, will there be any way for an immigrant to be or become a legal U.S. citizen, and for folks like Bill or David, children of immigrants of different status, have status? Do you understand the question? Okay.
Well, let me start. We have not talked about what happens if the worst case scenario,
Right.
the Supreme Court bans birthright citizenship. So there are many, many horrific consequences, but let me just paint a few. So first and foremost, we will have an entire generation of babies who will grow up to be elementary school kids, who will become high school students, who will be effectively stateless, right? They will have been born here in the United States. They won't speak the language of, say, their parents' country. They will have no ties to their parents' country. They'll be here in this limbo land, essentially stateless, classless. They will not have citizenship. They won't be able to naturalize. They will live under constant threat of deportation. As they get older, depending on the state, there might be some states that try to ban them from going to school, ban them from getting health care. They won't be able to travel particularly easily. We will be literally creating an underclass generation. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, think about that impact on our economy. California's economy, so much of our country's economy is based on immigrant labor. And this will literally kick out an entire group of workers who, just take San Francisco, are essential to our hotel industry, our restaurant industry, our healthcare industry, our tourism industry. Third thing, and this was part of why San Francisco and states sued, it creates horrific federal funding consequences because there are so many programs that you count based on citizenship. So if all of a sudden you toss aside a whole group of folks who are citizens, it's unclear whether we would get under federal funding formulas, we would see our federal funding drop by enormous amounts. So those are just three immediate impacts of all of this, and sort of the unanticipated consequences. We could conjecture, but there are many, many more beyond that.
Thank you for that. Wow, that's actually really scary. Yeah. I wanted to sit with that for a minute. And then I also wanted to ask, one of the questions that the audience had was, how has the citizenship test changed since Trump was elected? Do you feel like there's more hoops people have to jump through?
Well, so I'm not sure if I'm answering the question that's being asked. We're talking about birthright citizenship today, which is the right to become a citizen by virtue of being birthed here. And that's how most people become U.S. citizens. The second most frequent way of becoming a citizen is through naturalization, and that's if you are a lawful immigrant to the United States. And then after X number of years, 3 to 5 years, you can apply to be a naturalized citizen, and maybe some of you or your parents have done that. And the first time Trump changed the number of questions, and then under Biden it reverted to 100 possible questions, and it was increased again last year to 120, 125 possible questions, and they're all still pretty much the same, and you can look at them. I don't think there's any real curveballs in there, to be honest with you. Probably the hardest one is how does a bill become a law? You know, I think there's a lot of people that don't know what the answer to that question is. But the way it's being administered hasn't changed that much. Because, we have clients that get naturalized all the time, and they're just being asked a handful of questions. And community college classes and community-based organization classes for naturalization are an excellent place to go for training and education, and it's still pretty straightforward. I don't think that the sky has fallen on naturalization tests.
Okay.
I want to answer kind of a related question to this, which is the changes to the citizenship test, sanctuary policies, birthright citizenship bans are 3 of only many, many other ways the Trump administration has tried to come after immigrants. So, for example, something that's often not covered in the newspapers is in the last year, many of the federal funding streams that San Francisco and cities and states receive, the administration has tried to put anti-immigrant provisions. In other words, they've said to us, if you want money to address housing, you have to sign on the dotted line that you are going to agree to anti-immigrant provisions, sanctuary city or sanctuary type bans. If you want money for cops or anti-terrorism work or FEMA emergency grants, you need to sign on the dotted line, San Francisco, that you will agree to anti-immigrant provisions. And so of the 15 lawsuits that my office has filed, at least 7 have been challenging anti-immigrant, anti-LGBT, anti-climate change, anti-DEI provisions across a whole slew of these programs. And what is at stake for us? Billions of dollars of our federal funding. At the moment, the city has almost $1 billion budget deficit. If we lose on any of these cases, we could see that budget deficit rise, which is why this work is critical, that we've got to hold the line. But again, the administration is literally trying to think of every way to kick folks out who are the other. I'll mention maybe 2 other things that are coming down the pike. The administration is has come down with rules that say if you are an immigrant, you can't get any help from the federal government, right? And those rules were already litigated during Trump 1.0, but are coming back again. They've also proposed a rule that says if you live in housing that receives any money from the feds, so that's affordable housing, public housing, you can get kicked out. And so all of that is coming down the pike. Very, very intense, in addition to, say, a citizenship question in the next census, which would be catastrophic not just for immigrants, but catastrophic for, again, billions of dollars of federal funding that we currently receive.
Wow. Thank you for that. And I want to say thank you so much to our presenters. We're at time now. I want to just give you a few minutes to say any closing remarks, any final thoughts you want the audience to walk away thinking about or considering, just to wrap up our discussion today.
Well, thank you, and it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Amerika, for such a great job in moderating and yeah. And happy to join our model city attorney, really. I'll leave you with the word resistance. there are so many different things that have been thrown at us seemingly day after day from this administration, but you can make a difference. You can resist in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be necessarily filing a lawsuit. It can mean just showing up at some place. It can mean doing it through art, through music, through supporting an organization. You don't even have to go outside to help in the resistance. But everybody needs to stand up to this, because what's happening is unprecedented, and we all need to help our country for our children and our grandchildren, and just don't sit back. Be involved. Thank you.
So I want to first just thank ENDC for convening this. Thank you, Amerika. I love saying your name. Thank you, Amerika. Amerika. Professor, it's always good to just be in your presence. So thank you for all you've done over the years. I'm just going to echo parts of what the good professor said and what I had said earlier. There have been other times in history where good people, well-meaning people, did not stand up. And we saw what has happened during some of those moments. I'm actually, despite how I think dark some of this conversation has been, I am hopeful that the Supreme Court is going to do the right thing in the next couple months on this question. I am hopeful that the good people of this country are going to do what we need to do to take our democracy back. But between now and then is going to be an awful lot of work. And so, like Bill, like I said before, my ask of each of you is that you think about what is your role going to be. We know that change happens from person by person standing up, doing the right thing, and encouraging and inspiring other people to do that. And as your city attorney, my lawyers and I, we're going to do everything we possibly can, but we can't do it alone. We need everyone. We need you, we need your extended networks, the networks of your networks, doing what we can on every single one of these issues, holding the line and encouraging and inspiring others to do that. And when that happens, as Dr. King would say, the arc of this moral universe, it may be long, but it will bend back toward justice. I do think that will come, but it's going to take a lot of us. So I'm looking forward to doing that work. If there's anything that I can do with any of you, please let me know. And with that, Godspeed. Thank you.
And I want to thank you all again for being here and participating in this process and just hearing all the great information that was provided during this conversation.